Hi, this is Dean Greg Wunderle. This is a message for Sunday, February 19th. The gospel reading today was from Matthew chapter 5, 38 through 48. Jesus said to his disciples, "You have heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. When someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other one to him as well. If anyone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand him your cloak as well. Should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, go with him for 2 miles. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn your back on the one who wants to borrow. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes the sun rise on the bad and the good, and causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what recompense will you have? Do not the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what is unusual about that? Do not the pagans do the same? So be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect." The Gospel of the Lord. As you might be able to tell, I'm recording this from San Francisco International Airport. I'm on my way to a trip overseas to Singapore, and I wanted to record this, experiment a little bit, see how it comes out. In our Gospels and our readings this week, we had 3 distinct messages. One is to love our neighbor. The other is to be just in our love. And the third is to love perfectly. All of those are very big, tall orders. And I have a couple stories that I'll talk to you about. Ask you a question. We'll dive into the gospel a little bit, and then we'll come back with a few comments. So this week, I work for IBM full-time, and I'm also a permanent deacon for the Diocese of Cleveland. I had a young person come into my office, doing a terrific job for us at IBM, and was asking for some career advice. And they weren't quite sure what direction they were at and where they wanted to go. So what I did was I asked them to, over the next 2 weeks while I'm away, to mark down the things that they do during the work week that really feel like you were meant to do, things that really worked well for you, and when you finish you go, yeah, that's exactly what I should be doing. Mark down those things and we'll discuss them when we come back. But I also took it a step further. I asked this person to also take a look at their personal life and do the same thing over the course of the next couple of weeks. Take those things that make you go, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. The things that really feel good to do, the things that make you feel most alive, and mark those down. And then when we get together in a couple of weeks, we'll go over the 2 and see if we can blend them and help form a path for a future for this person to go to. Now, I would ask you who are listening to this to do the same thing right now. Take a moment and think about the things in your life that make you go, yeah, that's very meaningful. Yes, that's when I'm most alive. That's the thing that I feel like I'm really doing what God is asking me to do. So think about those things for a little bit while we talk. And we'll talk a little bit more about the gospel readings right now as we're doing that. In our gospel, we heard it was said that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, this is really talking about justice, and we need to be just, and the punishment really needs to fit the crime. You see, when this was first put out in the Old Testament, in the law of Moses, they were afraid that people were going to take out a whole village for someone taking maybe a loaf of bread or something, or if you were insulted, you might wipe out a whole family. So what Moses was trying to get to people from the law of God was that the crime must fit the punishment. We must be just. So an eye for an eye isn't, if someone takes your eye out, don't be violent, take their eye out too. He's really trying to use that as an example to be fair and to be just in your punishment. So many of you have seen the movie or the play by Victor Hugo or read the book Les Miserables. And in that movie, the primary character was Jean Valjean. And what a great, beautiful story it is. If you haven't seen the movie or read the book, I encourage you to do so. Because in there, the primary character, Jean Valjean, this took place during the French Revolution. And what happened was Jean Valjean was put into hard work in prison for stealing bread. And he stole the bread for his sister and her sister's child because they were starving. He was initially put in for, I think, 4 or 5 years for that offense, and because he tried to escape a few times, it ended up being 19 years that he had hard labor for stealing a little bit of bread. Now, if we talk about justice, was that a just punishment for the crime. I think most of us would agree that doesn't fit the crime. But we continue on with the Jean Valjean story. He does his time. He's 19 years. He gets out, and what happens? He tries to find a job, and no one will hire him because he's branded as a violent criminal. So what does he do? He gets destitute. He gets starving, and he's cold, and he ends up at the doorstep of a church. And the bishop welcomes him and asks him and invites him in, and the bishop lets him warm himself by the fire, and he gives him water to clean himself and to quench his thirst, and he sets him down at the table, gives him fresh food and fresh clothing, and treats him like a human being sitting down having a beautiful dinner. And the bishop does something else that was very touching and moving. He called him brother. Now imagine, if you're like me, you go to many cities or some cities and you walk by and there's a homeless person, and sometimes we can give them a little change or something, but other times we walk right by and we don't even make eye contact with this person. This is what we're dealing with Jean Valjean. So Jean Valjean was that homeless person that we walk right by. Now imagine someone important like a bishop, well-respected person, looks him in the eye and says, brother, and calls him brother. It was quite moving and quite touching. So Jean Valjean then goes to sleep, as does the bishop and his staff, and to repay the good bishop, as the story goes, Jean Valjean takes all the silver and puts it in a bag and leaves early in the morning. He gets up before everyone else and he steals it. He doesn't get very far, and the constable grabs him, brings him back, they beat him and bring him in. And what does the bishop do? The bishop grabs the 2 candlesticks and brings them to Jean Valjean and say, my brother, you have left the most beautiful pieces, and he gives them to him as well. Then he challenges him and asks him to take this and change his life. And there's a great love story all throughout. But we tell you the story because we talk about a just punishment, that's one, but also in our gospel message it says, offer no resistance to one who's evil. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other one as well. If someone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand him over your cloak as well. So let's think about that for a minute. Isn't this what the bishop was doing for Jean? He stole his silver, and he not only let him steal the silver, but he gave him the most important pieces, which were the candlesticks as well. Oftentimes we'll call that a candlestick moment. So this is we're called to love generously, in a surprisingly generous way, as the bishop did for Jean Valjean. And you might say to me, Deacon Greg, that's great, it's a good story, and I get it, but how does that apply to me? How can I give generously like that out of my life? I'm not Jean Valjean, I'm not a bishop, what can I do? Well, I'll tell you a real story, and that might be helpful. This past week, I had a person that's very close to me and dear to me who was in the hospital and is really having a very difficult time. And when I got to the hospital, there were several people in the room. One person was one of her friends from childhood, and they were playing a silly game together, and they were laughing, and even in this misery, she was able to smile and have the companionship of her dear friend. That's giving generously of her time, giving perfectly, I might say. Another person was there for her father. It's been a lifelong friend who was standing by her father's side, who was very distraught at what was going on, and this person was there to hold him up, to give him some strength and comfort. It was a very difficult time. Her sister was there, and her sister had tears that were coming down her eyes, and so was the patient. And it was very beautiful to see that they loved each other so much that they could cry together and share a tear together. Another person was sitting there and held her hand and told her a faith-based story and talked to her about the journey that she's going on and where she's going to be. And this was a very beautiful self-giving gift, perfect love in many ways. Another person took the young lady's husband out, got him a pizza and a beer just to get him out of the hospital, talked to him for a bit. He'd been in there for 3 days, and how difficult a time was it. So why do I tell you this story? Oh, another person came in and played the guitar and brought a friend with a banjo and played for a couple hours, and the joy that the music gave and the peace that the music gave to this person was such a beautiful, selfless gift that it was just an incredible thing to watch. I tell you this is because the third thing we were asked is to love perfectly. Be perfect just as your Heavenly Father is perfect. I think if you would ask all the people that were in the room, in the hospital room, including the person who's suffering, they would tell you, remember the question we asked earlier about the moment that we feel like we're doing God's work, the moment that we feel like that's what we're meant to do, that's where we're most fulfilled, I bet if you asked every person in that room, including the patient, they would say, that's it. That's what I'm here to do. And that's giving perfectly, just as our Heavenly Father gives perfectly. Now, there's other things we can do. We don't have to be in a hospital with someone. That's just an example and have to know of. But many of us who are teachers will see a child that doesn't have lunch money, and they'll share a sandwich or give lunch money to the child. Or perhaps the kid doesn't have supplies. They'll give school supplies out of their own money. You'll see a person who's a youth coach for soccer, football, wrestling, basketball, who is rushing home and skips dinner because they don't have time. They were running late at work. They go run practice, and when the practice is over, they're tired, they're hungry, they can't wait to get home, and guess what? One of the kids' parents are late, and they have to stand there and wait with the student and show the student, the young player, that they love them and will take care of them until their parent arrives. This is a perfect kind of love that we do every day, and I think it's very possible for all of us to do it. And what I invite you to do over the next week is to take a look at your own life. Take a look at the things that you do where you feel that you're most alive. Maybe it's something that happened this week, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, a year ago, 10 years ago. Think about those things. Bring those together, and those aha moments, I guarantee you, are things that not only you'll be happy about, but our good Lord would be happy about as well. This is Deacon Greg Wunderle. Peace be with you.